My name is Josh Human. I'm the curator of education and public programs at the Power Plant. Really delighted for this Sunday scene featuring Dr. Jing Jing Chang, professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, and addressing different aspects of an exhibition that has been at the Power Plant since late September. Howie Tsui, From Swelling Shadows, We Draw Our Bows, which features work in multiple media, from drawings to lenticular prints, which are sort of those prints that change as you move past them, and video installation as well. And Jing Jing comes with a depth of knowledge about the genre that Howie is exploring in his work. So I will disappear for now and leave things to Jing Jing Chang. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And welcome.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a great honor to be able to talk to you today. I want to give some historical and stylistic context and background to help audiences appreciate the iconography and the aesthetics of Howie Tsui's solo installation at the Power Plant, titled From Swelling Shadows, We Draw Our Bows. In particular, his Retainers of Anarchy from 2017, which is a 5-channel algorithmic animation comprised of hundreds of hand-painted ink drawings, where Howie Tsui depicts the floating wuxia-style characters within the setting of the Kowloon walled city in Hong Kong. What I hope to achieve in my talk is also to show how Howie Tsui's artwork and the Hong Kong aesthetics of liminality displayed in them can be seen as strategies that Hong Kongers and those in the diaspora can adopt to construct unique identities and communities that are floating, fluid, and always becoming, that exist in and beyond the official Chinese, national, colonial, post-colonial versions of realities and experiences. Hong Kong is a Chinese city, a former colonial city, a global metropolis of commerce and trade. Since the colonial times, Hong Kong existed at a borrowed place at a borrowed time. By examining its colonial and post-colonial history and the different uses of space, imagined, lived, and represented, as well as the development of the martial arts genre in cinema, we can find examples of floating identities in fluid and liminal space and time that exist between the East and West, the colonial, the national, and the transnational, the official and the grassroots, the local and the diaspora, as well as the past, the present, and the future. So here I want to go over some important key events in Hong Kong's colonial and post-colonial history, which will give you some context to understand how Hong Kong as a place and as a site, as an imaginary site, came to become a precarious existence, caught between the East and the West at a borrowed place at a borrowed time. Following the defeat of China during the First Opium War in 1842, Hong Kong was ceded to Britain in perpetuity after the signing of the Treaty of Nanking. At the time, Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston described Hong Kong as a barren island with hardly a house upon it. This characterization of Hong Kong would be, in a way, stuck with Hong Kong and its representation, and also this idea of Hong Kong being a barren rock without any house upon it would be mobilized by different stakeholders, including historians, politicians, policymakers, even filmmakers, etc. The Second Anglo-Chinese War, which is also called the Arrow War, which ended in 1858, ended with the Convention of Beijing and the cession of Kowloon to Britain. And in 1898, the new territories was leased to Britain for 99 years. And this is because at that time, Qing China was weakened following its defeat in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and 1895. And this move, this lease of new territories to Great Britain was actually a political move directed against the French and France and Russia, as many European nations at that time vied for colonial possessions and acquired spheres of influence. So that's the reason why British took over, more territories in Hong Kong. And Britain at that time declared new territories as part of the colony, but administered it separately from the urban area. And it was also during this time when China held its stance on maintaining sovereignty over the Kowloon walled city. So we jump to the 1980s, and this is important because this is the time when the leader in China, Deng Xiaoping, and the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which laid down the conditions and timetable for the return of Hong Kong to China. And at midnight on June the 30th, 1997, Hong Kong's solemn handover ceremony was held at the extension of the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center for the Chinese and British governments, and thus ended the unequal treaties. And the future of Hong Kong was to follow the model of one country, two systems, whereby Hong Kong was to pursue, without intervention, its capitalist system of free trade and open markets and lifestyle for 50 years. Its legal system was to be preserved and protected by the Joint Declaration and Basic Law. However, this would not be the case as demonstrated by the gradual encroachment of Chinese influence and dominance in the sphere of Hong Kong politics, society, economy, culture. And as you can see in my slide, there are a series of protests showing that the one country, two system model was not followed. And as we all know, there was the anti-extradition bill protest in 2019, and also recently the national security law protest. And what is important to note is that throughout the entire process of the handover, Hong Kong people were never consulted. And so the experience of Hong Kong people were always already caught between the two powers, Great Britain and China. So here I want to show you the growth of the population in Hong Kong. After the Second World War and during the Civil War in China, and increasingly so afterwards, the Chinese people in China had to choose between either living under the regime of the communist rule or living under British rule. And many went to Hong Kong and as refugees, as migrants, etc. And so one important thing to note is that for the Hong Kong government, space was an important issue. The shortage of space, the shortage of housing was an important key issue. Currently, Hong Kong has a population of over 7.5 million, and the population density of 7,140 per kilometer square. And so you can imagine how space was very hard to, it's very hard to find a place to live. And this image here shows you the different areas of squatter areas in the 1950s. So there were two solutions in a way to resolve the issue of space shortage, of housing shortage. On the one hand, you have a laissez-faire approach, and on the other hand, a more heavy-handed top-down, more structured implementation of public housing. And so the Kowloon Wall City, which I mentioned briefly, was located in Kowloon, and this was the only place in Hong Kong at the time from the end of 1890s up until 1994. So it was the only place that was still under the jurisdiction, under the sovereignty of China. And so it was a place known during the 60s as a place, as a city of darkness. It was crammed with illegal buildings and doctors and dentists operating without licenses. Food processing factories were operating without license. There were gambling dens, brothels, and it was in a way policed by the triads during the 50s and 60s because the colonial government didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to upset its diplomatic relations with mainland China. But more and more so in the 70s, because of the crackdown of corruption, the crackdown on corruption within the police force, the power and influence of the triads in the Kowloon Wall City began to wane. But nonetheless, it was a place just left on its own. And so you have these high rises rising and in a very just organic way and not structured at all. So that's Kowloon, right? Kowloon Wall City. But what is important to note is that the Kowloon Wall City came to become, in a way, a symbol of the clash between Great Britain and China, where the Hong Kong people were, again, caught in the middle. And so this space, the Kowloon Wall City, became an imaginary space as well for to become raw materials for artists like Howie Tsui to use in his work. On the other hand, you have another solution to resolve housing shortage, and that is a very systematic approach and implementation of the public housing complex, which began in the 1950s. So in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, you see greater and greater areas of places where you have public housing complexes. And I want to now actually, okay, after I talk about this, I'll show you a couple of clips actually. So what I want to focus on and remind everyone is that in tandem with the public housing implementation to rehouse and to resettle people in the squatter areas, you have representations and a representation of what public housing means for Hong Kong. And for the Hong Kong government, it had a series of campaigns, such as this Miss Ping On's campaign. And these are a series of posters that would be posted in the public housing neighborhoods. And this is to show that in order to live a modern life, you have to keep it clean. And this is in a way to justify the legitimacy and the good work done by the colonial government. So this is interesting, right? So at the same time, you have this reality of public housing complexes emerging, but at the same time, you have the government also trying to create a myth out of this reality to reinforce to justify its legitimacy. So the clip that I want to show you is from Report to the Gods. It's a short docudrama created by the Hong Kong government, and it shows you at the end of this documentary, at the end of this docudrama, you see a little child running up in this public housing complex to show you that life is good. Life is improving. Life was not so good before, but now life is improving. And again, the symbol, the vision, the symbol of the public housing, the high rise is very important.
Years past, my people have been behaving themselves very well indeed. And so they will for many years to come.
Okay. So the next clip I want to show you is, the next two clips I want to show you are from this film called Father and Son. It's a new wave, Hong Kong new wave film directed by Alan Fong in 1981. And here, although it's already 20 so years after the first emergence of the public housing scheme, you can see that the history of squatter areas going on fire and also living in public housing complexes are part of Hong Kong people's identity and Hong Kong people's lived experience and also memory, collective memory. And this collective memory of living in this very cramped space, but still you feel a sense of community, has been represented over and over and over again. So this is the fire that happened in this film. So here in this scene that I just showed you, the father was yelling at his wife, asking her, why didn't you make sure that our son is with us? And here you see their homes literally got demolished, got swollen by fire. And years later, he would send his son to study at San Francisco State University. And here I'll show you the clip. So years before, you can see that they're living in the squatter areas, but now that years later, after the Hong Kong government had built public complexes to resettle various squatter area populations, you see that he just received the certificate, the graduation diploma from his son. So he's very happy. By comparing the two films, The Report to the Gods versus Father and Son, you can see the different approaches in representing space in Hong Kong. In both cases, the high rise right? The image of the high rise is very important because it shows progress. And that's what's advocated and promoted by the Hong Kong government. It's because of these public housing, you know, we're able to create a better living for Hong Kong people at that time. And it shows their benevolence, it shows their good work. And it's very positive. But years later, you still have retelling, the recount of living in poverty and then living in these high-rise complexes. But the idea, or rather the sentiment, is a little bit different, right? In the last clip that I showed you, you see that the father is very happy because his son has succeeded. However, he dies, he falls and he dies. And so this moment of success and progress is also tainted in a way by death. It's a bittersweet moment. So I want to show you, before I move on to the martial arts genre, I want to show you a series of pictures showing what that many Hong Kong people are still living in very cramped spaces and dire conditions. And the next series of pictures are actually screen grabs from a documentary that was published on YouTube called Trapped Inside Hong Kong's Cage Houses. This is published on YouTube just recently in April. And despite the fact that there's so many high rises, so many public housing, so many new buildings, still a lot of people still find themselves living in very cramped spaces. You have Mr. Chan, who's age 70. He lives in a room that's 7 meters square. And this is very sad because even though in our head we imagine that Hong Kong is a place, it's cosmopolitan. It's where you know, people love to go shopping and a lot of people are well off. But at the same time, more than half of the population, or close to half of the population, still lives in public housing complexes, and a lot, more than 200,000 people, still find themselves living in subdivided apartments, living in unhygienic conditions with little lighting, with little ventilation. And even though the government is trying to build as many housing complexes as possible, still the wait list is very long. Okay, so again, what I want to stress here is that space is important. It's part of the reality of Hong Kong people. It's resolved in a way by the government through building more houses, right? Building more high rises. And it is also used as a symbol to represent the government's benevolence, its good work. On the other hand, you have filmmakers who have also used the same symbol, but representing something else. So what is missing here is the Hong Kong people's voices. And I think that by looking at Howie Tsui's work, we as spectators, we as viewers can negotiate and try to imagine a space for a resistant voice that is neither top-down, nor colonial, nor national. Okay, so now I want to talk about the martial arts genre, which is also found in Howie Tsui's work. In his Anarchy, Retainers of Anarchy from 2017, there are figures from the martial arts genre, cinema and literature, that he uses to populate his work. And I want to talk about what martial arts genre represents and mean for Hong Kong. Now, a lot of you have heard of the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It was a film from 2000, directed by Ang Lee. And in a way, it's one of the most popular martial arts films that is known in the world. But the martial arts genre actually has a long history. When we talk about martial arts, there are actually two strands of martial arts. One is Kung Fu. Kung Fu is bare fist. So Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan. And there is wuxia. Wuxia means swordplay films. And I will talk about what wuxia means. Wuxia genre, martial arts genre, provide the perfect space, perfect genre to talk about the clash between fantasy and reality, nostalgia and history, and also resistance versus co-optation. There are different genres of swordplay films, including period films, historical epics, mythological tales of magic, action spectaculars with colorful costumes, fantastical and magical genre. One of the first martial arts films was the burning of the Red Lotus Monastery, or the burning of the Red Lotus Temple from 1928 to 1931. It's a Chinese silent film serial directed by Zhang Xichuan, and it was adapted from the novel The Tale of the Extraordinary Swordsman. It has 16 parts, and this was among the longest films ever produced. It ran 27 hours in total, and it was released in 19 parts between 1928 and 1931. Unfortunately, no copies have survived. And this is important. Ever since the 1930s in Shanghai film industry, the wuxia film genre was a regular staple. And in fact, it made up of 60% of Shanghai film productions during the late 20s. And there were 400 in total between 1928 and 1931. So usually, even back then when there was no CGI, you can see that the filmmakers were very innovative. They used, I guess, stop motion. Also, the wuxia martial artists would be flying. They would be leaping through windows, and they used trampoline and mattress for the landing. What is important to note that just as space was important and politicized, martial arts film genre was also politicized. This is because in the early 1930s, film acquired a political meaning. It was during that time in the 30s when China was in turmoil. There was the encroachment of Japan in Manchuria, and also the rise of left-wing patriotic filmmaking during foreign aggression. Therefore, martial arts film was seen as superstition, it was seen as supernatural, and therefore not useful for helping China to fight off against foreign invasion. And so it was censored. In the late 1930s, and increasingly so after the Second World War and after the civil war between Communist China and the Kuomintang Nationalist Chinese government, a lot of filmmakers went to Hong Kong. And so the Cantonese film industry became a site for the flourishing of martial arts movies. And this is where Hong Kong film industry became important, because at that time, it was banned. The martial arts film genre was banned in China, but it was not in Hong Kong because Hong Kong was a British colony. And in the 50s, during the golden age period of Hong Kong cinema, a lot of these martial arts films were distributed overseas to Malaysia, to Vietnam, to US Chinatown theaters. And so you can imagine how during this moment, 50s and 60s, was a time when Hong Kong film was able to reach out not only to its domestic audiences, but to audiences overseas, which helped create this imaginary imaginary of what it means to be Chinese living during that time. Here here is an image from a newspaper showing a story from the Condor Trilogy. So the Condor Trilogy is a trilogy. It's a novel. It's a series of novels, but they're first published in the newspaper Ming Bao, and this is one of the most famous wuxia genre in Hong Kong, and it is from this series where Howie Tsui drew his characters from. So the wuxia genre was the perfect the perfect genre of hybridity between highbrow and lowbrow, and between wuxia and kung fu. There was a lot of cross-fertilization. This series of novels tell the adventures of martial artists, and it's also about love and revenge in the imaginary realm of Jianghu, Gongwu, set against the backdrop of ancient China during the warring periods of Jing, Song, and Yuan empires. And wuxia, the wuxia genre provides this imaginary space, this parallel universe in the past, where the good and the evil fight against each other, where the good always triumphs over the evil. But it's also a place where there is a set of rules, a set of law that govern this world, that govern this world space, right? And these laws include righteousness, trust, tidiness, tolerance. And martial artists were supposed to follow strictly these principles, so to speak. So this is interesting because the wuxia genre, in a way, it is true, it's based on reality, it's based on history, but at the same time, it's reimagined as a space where these often outlaws were able to fight against corrupt officials. And so it's a perfect space actually for Hong Kong filmmakers to talk about a lot of contentious issues, political issues in Hong Kong. And I show you here a series of pictures from this very famous film, Golden Swallow. It's directed by King Hu, who is one of the most famous wuxia filmmakers in Hong Kong. Okay. Now, I want you to look at the different representation of space. Think about the space of contemporary Hong Kong in docudramas like Report to the God and also Father and Son, versus the space of this imaginary Jianghu, right? This imaginary space of chivalry, of martial artists. And look at how it's represented. I want to show you a clip right now from a very famous wuxia film called Duel to the Death. And this is the moment when two martial artists fight to death, literally fight to death. But I'm very interested in how these characters are able to, how these characters fly and they're almost like acrobats in this very expansive space, this landscape, this very beautiful landscape. So here, the government is not there, right? It's not represented. In this space of Jianghu, an alternative society, an alternative space, in this world of wuxia, the martial artists have to fight literally to death to determine whether good will triumph over evil. Okay, and this is very very interesting if you compare this kind of space versus the very structured space of public housing, and then also the not so structured, more organic space of Kowloon Wall City. And you can see how different Hong Kong communities can arise within those spaces, but also how these spaces provide a site for different representations of Hong Kong identity. And the genre of wuxia continue to be very important and popular. The novels written by Jing Yong, who wrote the Condor Trilogy, they're adapted over and over and over again in Hong Kong, on Hong Kong TV. And they're very famous, especially during the 1980s, I would say. And these were distributed as VHS tapes in Southeast Asia as well. So Hong Kong popular culture and the imaginary of the Hong Kong wuxia genre was not only seen and experienced by domestic audiences, the local audiences in Hong Kong, but also enjoyed by various communities in Southeast Asia, in other parts of the world, in the United States, in wherever you can get access to videotapes. So I want to end this section, the martial arts genre, with this one slide. Just as the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon film was very popular, you have another film called Hero. Following the success of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, filmmakers began to make a lot of wuxia films. And this is one of the most famous wuxia films. It's directed by Zhang Yimou. He's a mainland Chinese filmmaker from 5th generation. And with this film, he, in a way, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of critics have viewed this film as a betrayal, in a way, of his identity as an auteur, because he's been co-opted by the government. In this film, the final scene shows the triumph of the emperor and the death of these martial artists. So the question is, does good triumph over evil or not? And so what is important to note is that even though martial arts film, the martial arts genre, can be used as a way to critique the government, but at the same time, it can also be mobilized by the government, in this case, by the Chinese government, to talk about how good they are, or how benevolent they are, and how kind they are, right? So this is something to keep in mind, that no matter which genre you use, it can be used in both ways, both as a resistant genre, but also as a genre that reinforce official narratives. And so the question that I want to end with today in my talk is, so where can we find Hong Kong people's voices, or which space can we create, or which space can artists create to allow marginalized voices to emerge? The narrative, the myth of Hong Kong as a barren rock without a house upon it was mobilized by the British colonial government, because it presented itself as benevolent, and it presented itself as a laissez-faire government, which in turn allowed Hong Kong to become a capitalist paradise. So that is the colonial rhetoric. That's one. And going back to, and then another rhetoric is the Chinese government rhetoric. So for the colonial government, Hong Kong was not part of China, right? But for Chinese government, Hong Kong has always been part of China. It is part of Chinese nationalist history. And Hong Kong represents the lost child of Hong Kong under British oppression. And so the handover was in a way an embrace by China to take back Hong Kong and to end the century of humiliation. But these narratives create, in a way, these narratives are both top down. So where is Hong Kong? Hong Kong is stuck again in the middle. So what is its identity? Is it floating? Is it transient? What is it? And let me suggest to you that by looking at Howie Tsui's artwork, this is what we can imagine. We can think of his work as representing a space of liminality, with seemingly with landscape of the wuxia world, with the high rise and in a way not so structured space of the Kowloon Wall City, and the floating martial arts figures. We can see this as a space of liminality, as a space of becoming. And this is where and within this space is where not only local Hong Kong, but also overseas communities can imagine a space that is neither colonialist nor nationalist. And as spectators and as viewers, I think that we can enter into a relationship and a negotiation with his artwork and also imagine this space, a community, a Hong Kong community, a Hong Kong aesthetics that is not just local, but global and also transnational. Okay, so thank you so much. This ends my talk for today. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jing Jing. We really appreciate, just how holistic you've approached Howie's work. And sort of, putting it in this great context. I do have some questions, and meanwhile, okay, there may be a question from an audience member. So the interesting thing is we opened this exhibition in late September, and we've had a number of conversations, including Howie himself in conversation with Rhiannon Vogel. A lot of these programs end up on our Vimeo page, vimeo.com/thepowerplantto. No one has yet mentioned Confucian philosophy. And so I wonder, sort of, it's like, as I hear more about wuxia as a genre, it seems very linked to Confucian philosophy.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Confucian philosophy has been part of Chinese history for over 2,000 years. It was used as statecraft. It was part of statecraft. And in order to become an official in China, up until 1905, people had to learn the classics, the Confucian classics. So it's part of daily life.
The analects?
The analects, there are a lot.
A lot of
there
them.
are five classics. And but at the same time, it can become corrupt, right? Because it became part of the government statecraft. And so in order to become part of officials, you can cheat. And sometimes people with money, they can buy their degrees. And so people, young people who really try hard to study, they study really hard for this to pass this exam. They could never pass it for some reason. Maybe because they didn't know right people. They weren't able to study at the right school. And so it is seen as, it is a two-faced, Janus-faced reality, right? It's both part of the official culture, but it's also corrupt. And in a way, this is the perfect, the martial arts genre is the perfect imaginary space to talk about these Confucian ideas. And so in the world of wuxia, in Jianghu, martial artists, those who follow these principles, they triumph. They will win at the end. And those who forsake or those who don't follow these principles, they die, you know, they're supposed to be vanquished. Because at the end of the day, when the government is corrupt, what do? You people need to hold on to some belief that there is good in this world. And Confucianism, Confucian ideology and philosophy is always there. You know, people always go back to it, and they believe that if you are good, if you are humane, you know, things will turn out fine.
Yeah, and
so that's the connection.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, as you point out, it's sort of like two-faced, but maybe there's like a third. Yeah. Maybe there's a third face in there also, in that, you know, what is good is sort of by social contract.
Yeah.
So like the almost like the majority has a particular voice in what is considered good.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, even though there's sort of like two sets of philosophy, both in the Eastern and Western traditions of, you know, this notion of a universal good that, you know, so we'll say compassion is, you know, like a great example. Compassion is generally regarded as a good quality in Eastern and Western philosophies. And yet the reality is that compassion is sometimes thrown out the window in favor of something else that is regarded as good.
Yeah.
So patriotism might be so like on behalf of your country, you may go and do things that are the exact opposite of compassion, but it, you know, so there's this ranking, this subjectivity of goodness almost.
Yeah, and something I want to maybe a point that I did not stress enough is the idea of community. So this is the third space. You have the official space, right? You have the space of the Jianghu. But then at the end of the day, what is important is family and the sense of community. And in the clip I showed you, father and son, it's so sad, right? He dies. But it really shows you that what is left is not the degree that his son got in the States, not this high rise, but his love for his son. You know, even till the end, he loves his son. And I think this is seen in the photographs of the Kowloon Wall City photographs that Howie used, and also in his artwork where you have this space, right, the Kowloon Wall City, but the individual panels, and within each you have a space of community, and that is, I think, the core of the message in a lot of wuxia films as well. You have films like there's this one famous film called One Armed Swordsman. At the end, he kills everyone. He's the good swordsman, and he kills all the bad people. And instead of staying within this martial arts world, he leaves with his new love. They're going to leave this world behind and start their family. And I feel that a lot of these martial arts films talk about that. You know, they don't want to live in this world anymore.
It's sort of like the necessity to fight, but once the fight is won, life, like real life, can go on.
Yes.
I almost wonder if, I mean, and maybe this is like a crass comparison, but I wonder if wuxia is almost like to Chinese film culture as like in, we'll say, you know, like quote unquote the West. There's the idea of the Wild West films of John Wayne and Zorro, like larger, you know, or you know, even shifting a little bit more, you know, Batman, Superman, like superheroes. who fight against injustice. I have one last question, and then we'll have to wrap up. Of course, the role of women in fighting. I wonder if so. Of course, you know, it's almost like wuxia has made it into the mainstream because of Mulan. Started off as a Disney animated film, and now a real live action film. I wonder if you could speak just briefly about that.
Yeah, that is. I see Mulan as a tale of not just patriotism, but also of filial piety. She goes to fight for her country because she loves her father, and at the end she returns to the home. Like, I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the cartoon.
Right.
There's actually a Mulan film version from the 1930s as well.
Oh, wow.
There's a Shanghai
so it goes way
film
back.
version.
Yeah.
It goes way, way back. This story goes way, way back. A lot of adaptations. And these films, wuxia films, they talk about reversal of gender roles and also the relevance of gender roles, of strict gender roles. But my reading of the Disney version, as I recall, is at the end, she goes back home and she's dressed once again as a woman.
Right.
And she gets married. So these films, even though they show how women are able to fight and fight for their country, but I think at the end of the day, the most important and most powerful institution is still the Chinese family.
Right.
She does everything for her father.
She's still a good daughter.
She's still a good daughter.
Right.
Yeah, she's still a good daughter. And this is Confucianism. Confucianism, in a way, is really about these strict social roles. You are a daughter. You are a good daughter to your father. If you're a mother, you're a good mother to your son, to your children, and your relationship with your husband has to be, respect. And this kind of relationship within the household extend outward to the relationship between rulers and the ruled, between master, lords, and its retainers. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your insights. Again, for those who are watching live or not, you may be seeing the recording on our Vimeo page, vimeo.com/thepowerplantto. Thank you so much, Dr. Jing Jing Chang from Wilfrid Laurier University.
Thank you so much, Josh. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.